moment for so many of us. And I have also, as part of the interim committee that on gender-based violence, we were very instrumental in terms of doing consultations around the development of this particular policy and ultimately its launch and adoption in in March 2020. So this for me is something is a subject matter that I'm very, very passionate about. So how, yeah. Okay, so the focus of my presentation, this is actually strange for me. What I'm seeing and what is here are different things. So the focus of my presentation is that I am going to look at defining the problem, and then I'm also going to do share with you the roadmap as to how we got to the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, and also ultimately speak to what the implications are for us as institutions of higher learning and also as a COP. All right. So, so to begin my presentation, I think you may want to ask why the particular focus on or the increased need to address femicide in South Africa. And we know that gender-based violence has or is a long-standing crisis in the country. And femicide is the most extreme form manifestation of this broader problem. And I want to share with you a little story around how we came about, or how as a country we actually came about to articulate and acknowledge gender-based violence as a crisis. So in 2017, when I was working for the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, we commissioned a study that was called Violence Against Women in South Africa, a Country in Crisis. And we really wanted to understand why violence against women persists in the country and what needed to be done to address it. So we did the study, and during the launch of the study, we called the then Minister of Women to come in and launch the study. And I suspect that when she agreed to come and launch the study, she had not quite engaged with the title of the study. So she came through, and at the time when she was then supposed to be launching the study, that is when she realized the title. And she was very livid about it. She was very upset about it, and clearly articulated that we cannot be calling violence against women or gender-based violence a crisis, because that will cause panic, because that's not where we are as a country. It means that now we have to deploy all emergency departments, we have to deploy funding, we have to end all of that. And that's exactly what we were calling for as activists. That's exactly what we were calling for as civil society organizations, for the need for gender-based violence to be recognized as a crisis so that it could be prioritized in terms of country efforts to address it. And I'm glad to say that through a lot of the lobbying and advocacy that was done by civil society organizations and grounded in the study that was done, we came to a point where the president actually declared gender-based violence and femicide as a crisis in August 2018. Again, we need to be focusing on femicide in South Africa because it is a unique and a highly prevalent problem for us as a country, with a femicide rate that is estimated to be 5 times the global average. At least an average of 5 women are killed in the country on a daily basis, and we cannot afford to ignore that problem. Again, we have seen over the years the increased media reporting around issues of femicide, and we also know that this is not fully representative of the challenge or problem, because these are only public cases that we are seeing in the media. Again, we've seen the role of social justice movements like the Total Shutdown, like the Me Too movement, who've really generated public awareness, interest, and discussion around the area of femicide. Again, international pressure and attention has also compelled us as a country to put a focus on femicide. Or to address femicide. In 2017, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women visited the country to try and understand the challenge of gender-based violence. And in her concluding report, one of the key things or critical recommendations was that South Africa needed to establish a femicide watch. So as a country, we needed to be monitoring the issue of femicide. Again, we have increasingly seen over the years a demonstrated political willingness in terms of addressing gender-based violence, and also collaborative efforts between state and non-state actors in terms of addressing the issue of femicide. We have seen how the president of the country has consistently championed the issue of gender-based violence and ensured that it is a part of the SONA agenda. During his COVID reports, during his COVID speeches, he would consistently speak about this matter. So the issue of femicide is really one that is very critical for us. And also, as institutions of higher learning, we are not exempt from this problem. We have seen in the media, and we know this because we work in the area, we have seen how we are directly affected by the challenge of femicide. And I am not going to give an academic definition of what femicide is. You will forgive me. I am an activist, so I do not academic. So, interestingly, for South Africa, because this is an area of importance, we have developed a country-level definition of femicide. And you can find this in the draft National Femicide Prevention Strategy, which is currently up for approval by the minister and later, subsequently, by cabinet. So in South Africa, we define femicide, or the strategy defines femicide as the killing of a female person, regardless of the person's age, gender identity, sexual orientation, whether this is committed directly or indirectly by another person. And this definition is going to be very important for us because it will enable us to continue to monitor femicide as part of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. And how did we get to the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide? And you will see from the roadmap that is there, it appears as if all of this work started on the 1st of August 2018, but this is not the case. We know that over the years, civil society organizations and groups had been advocating for a multi-sectoral plan around gender-based violence. And what then happened on the 1st of August 2018 was a culmination of all of these efforts where you had women, gender non-conforming persons, trans women, cis women coming together and protesting and calling for 24 demands that will ensure that towards us addressing the problem of gender-based violence and femicide in the country. And one of actually the first demand in the 24 demands was around the call for a gender-based violence summit, presidential summit, that would then coordinate all strategies, interventions, and inputs around how we could deal with the issue of GBVF. In the country, we had over 400 organizations that were represented at the summit. I'm sure some of us were a part of it. And following this summit, a declaration was then signed by government and civil society representatives, and one of the provisions within that declaration was the creation or establishment of an interim national steering committee that would drive the agenda of developing the national strategic plan, which is the committee that I was a part of as a civil society member. And our primary mandate was to really establish or to create and develop this national strategic plan. And how we did this is that we held consultations across all of the 9 provinces in the country. And ultimately, we had the very first national strategic plan in South Africa that is collectively owned by government, civil society, the private sector, I'm hoping to some extent the academic sector. So it is our national strategic plan. It should be our national strategic plan, and we all ought to own it. And of course, we know, I'm not saying it is a perfect document. It does have its limitations, but for the first time, we agreed on some kind of a multi-sectoral plan. And what is this plan really about? It provides a coordinated national response around how we ought to be dealing with the issue of gender-based violence and femicide. The policy has 6 pillars. The first one is around accountability, coordination, and leadership. Some of you may have seen in the past couple of weeks, there was a call for submissions around the establishment of the National Council on Gender-Based Violence. And I think that was an area of interest for us as academic institutions to ensure that we have some kind of representation within that particular structure. Pillar 2 looks at prevention and rebuilding social cohesion. And Pillar 3, justice, safety, and protection. Pillar 4, response, care, support, and healing. Pillar 5 is around economic power, and we were very intentional about calling this pillar economic power and not economic empowerment. Pillar 6, research and information management. And what runs through as a thread across all of the 6 pillars are the issues of accountability, monitoring and evaluation, and prevention. It cuts across all of the pillars of the NSP. And what is also important to note, colleagues, is around the intentionality around the F in the gender-based violence and femicide. So we did not just call the strategy a national strategic plan on gender-based violence, but for South Africa, because of the unique problem and the challenge that we have of femicide, we were very intentional about including the F in the naming of the NSP. However, much as that was done, the reality is that in terms of its articulation, so it lacks articulation, the whole strategy in itself lacks articulation of femicide as a distinct form of gender-based violence, which requires a unique approach in terms of how we address it. And it's also important to note that while all of these processes were ongoing around the National Strategic Plan, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development had already started a process of developing a prevention strategy for femicide. However, this process had to be halted in order to contribute towards the NSP development processes. In saying that, it is important for me to then also to emphasize the fact that the NSP, with its limitations, still remains a very useful overarching framework on how we prevent gender-based violence through gender norms transformation work, through and other prevention strategies. What is also important about the NSP is how it acknowledges how gender norms. So in terms of its framing and principles, if you go through the document, it really frames or acknowledges how gender norms play a significant role in perpetuating gender-based violence and femicide. Particularly, it outlines some of the factors that we know that lead to gender-based violence and femicide. It speaks to issues of how ideas of masculinities are centered on male control of women, male sexual entitlement, risk-taking and antisocial behaviors. It also frames itself around ideas about or challenging ideas about femininity and masculinities, and how the promotion of women's subordination to men, encouraging women to be complicit with violence, are some of are the norms that need to be challenged in trying to address gender-based violence. It also very importantly speaks to issues of, or is framed around an analysis and understanding of how homophobic and transphobic violence against sexual and gender minority persons due to a range of patriarchal and heteronormative and cisnormative beliefs and attitudes. So the NSP then articulates that by understanding and challenging these harmful gender norms, we can work towards preventing gender-based violence and creating a more equitable and inclusive society. And I am going to zero in now on Pillar 2 of the National Strategic Plan. Of course, as I mentioned, prevention does run through all of the pillars, but I thought just for the purposes of this presentation and the limitations of time, I will just focus on the one that speaks directly to gender norms transformation and challenging toxic masculinities. And you will note in the NSP some of the key principles that underpin the approach. And I think these are very important as we think about our own policies, strategies, and interventions in our institutions, that we reflect on this. We reflect on these principles and ensure that they are weaved through or integrated within our own work. So the issue of victim-centeredness, social justice approach, evidence-based prevention, and also the need to address the drivers of gender-based violence, inclusivity and responsiveness. Those are some of the key principles. And now, this should be, for me, the very important slide for us. What does all of this mean for us as institutions of higher learning? What does this mean for us as a COP? And I'm still going to use Pillar 2 of the plan. So the Pillar 2 has a number of focus areas, and I only focused on the 5 that I thought were directly related to the work that we do, or could be aligned to the work that we do as institutions of higher learning. So the first focus area around Pillar 2 is around the need to develop and implement a comprehensive national prevention strategy. And what is it that we can do as institutions of higher learning? Or how can we contribute to the realization of this outcome? We can conduct research on the different forms of violence, their root causes, and the effectiveness of prevention strategies. We have a group team that looks at monitoring and evaluation, and I think this is an area of work that could be very useful for us. We can also contribute to policy analysis and recommendations around this area of work. Secondly, the second focus area that I think is very relevant to our own work is around the need to implement evidence-based interventions that lead to behavior change and social norms transformation in key groups. Again, here we can conduct research and evaluation studies on the effectiveness of these interventions. We can also collaborate with NGO researchers, practitioners to develop these interventions that can then be implemented across different sectors. Thirdly, the need to shift from toxic masculinities to positive expressions of masculinity and diverse sexual and gender identities. What is it that we can do? We can incorporate gender and sexuality studies into curriculum, into our own curriculums. This was spoken about yesterday by one of the teams. And we also need to invest in scholarly work that explores the impact of gender norms, toxic masculinities, and alternative expressions of masculinities. The fourth focus area is around increased integration of prevention interventions on violence against LGBTQIA persons, and integrating this within broader GBV prevention interventions. What can we do? We can conduct research in terms of how this can be done. How do we integrate or how do we intersect this work into broader GBV prevention efforts? We can also, in our own internal in our own institutions, through our own internal policies, we can develop inclusive policies and support services that address the unique needs of those groups. And finally, in terms of creating safe public spaces, what can we do? As the COP, we can do advocacy and we can do policy advocacy around this area of work, and also within our own campuses we can develop and implement safety initiatives that ensure that our campus environments are safe and free from violence. So, colleagues, these are the reflections, some of the implications that this national strategic plan has in terms of our work and for us as the COP. And I want to end on this note, that the COP is going to be that space where the activism is ignited, the light of activism or the torch of activism is ignited and is continually fired up, because in academic institutions it's doctor, prof, and what, and all of the protocols and all of that. But I hope in all of that we can still be comrades, we can still be activists, we can still push the work in ways that are very meaningful. And so I end with the call to us as individual activists, practitioners, and collectively as the COP to say we can actively work towards the creation of university environments that are safe, free, and inclusive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Vandamoyo, for that very informative presentation. Can we give a second round of applause? I think we also saw that there are a number of actions we can take in our institutions to include in our strategic plans, in the plans we have for our units for GBV. And I enjoyed the definition of femicide. Killing of a female person by a person. Okay, right.